Here is an essay format theological, historical, and scriptural analysis of the uploaded article titled Tongues and the Mystery Religions of Corinth by H. Wayne House, including an introduction and a concluding summary. Tongues and the Mystery Religions of Corinth, a theological and historical analysis. Introduction. The modern debate surrounding the nature of tongues in the New Testament, particularly in 1 Corinthians, has created significant doctrinal division in Christian circles. A key interpretative battleground is whether Paul was referring to ecstatic, unintelligible speech as a heavenly language or known human languages used for edification and evangelism. The backdrop of paganism in ancient Corinth offers essential clues. H. Wayne House, in his scholarly work, Tongues and the Mystery Religions of Corinth, presents a compelling argument that the Corinthian believers' fascination with ecstatic speech was influenced by their former pagan cultic practices. This essay will examine House's analysis through historical, theological, and scriptural lenses, affirming the view that the Corinthians had imported pagan ecstasies into the church and that Paul's response sought to correct, not affirm, such abuses. Historical context. Corinth and the pagan religious environment. A. Corinth as a melting pot of paganism. Corinth was a prominent Greco-Roman city known for its immorality, pluralism, and religious syncretism. By Paul's day, various mystery religions had taken hold, many of which emphasized spiritual ecstasy and direct communion with the divine through altered states. House highlights that the Corinthians, steeped in these cults prior to conversion, likely carried over these expectations into their Christian worship, p. 134. B. Influence of mystery religions. Three religious systems are presented as possible sources of Corinthian ecstatic phenomena. One, Cybele Attis cult, known for its emotional excess, self-mutilation, and ecstatic worship. Though lacking direct evidence of a temple in Corinth, the cult was known throughout the region, p. 137. 2, Dionysian cult, the most likely candidate, emphasizing intoxication, frenzied dancing, and ecstatic speech. Archaeological evidence affirms Dionysus worship in Corinth by the 4th century BC, p. 138. 3. Apollo worship, particularly at Delphi, where oracles spoke in ecstatic utterances interpreted by priests, providing a likely parallel to the tongues interpretation dynamic seen in Corinth, p. 138. These cults offered an emotional, subjective spirituality rooted in personal experience, something Paul firmly challenged in his epistles. Sic. Scriptural and theological examination of 1 Corinthians 12-14. A. Pagan influence and Paul's corrective strategy. Paul's epistle does not affirm the ecstatic practices occurring at Corinth. Instead, it confronts them head-on. House argues that Paul used the Corinthians' terminology such as pneumatikos, spiritual one, mysterion, mystery, and glossa, tongue, to dismantle their assumptions rather than endorse their usage, pp. 140-41. His approach is conciliatory at times, strategic rather than affirming, so as not to alienate the believers entirely, yet he carefully redirects their enthusiasm toward edifying practices, p. 144. For example, in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1, Paul states, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal." KJV. House suggests Paul was possibly alluding to the cymbals and gongs of Dionysian ritual which were used to stimulate ecstasy. Without love, the Corinthian use of tongues was as empty and vain as their former pagan rites, p. 140. B. Glossolalia as a pagan parody. Glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, was not unique to Christianity. It was a known phenomenon in the pagan world, especially in Dionysian and Apollonian worship, p. 139. House demonstrates that pagan glossolalia sought divine possession, emotional release, or mystical union, while Paul emphasized that Christian tongues must serve edification and reflect order, 1 Cor 14, 26-33. House notes the irony in Paul's tone when he says, "He that speaketh in an unknown tongue edifieth himself," 1 Cor 14:4. Paul is not encouraging self-centered spiritual expression, but subtly rebuking it. His theology of spiritual gifts, particularly in 1 Corinthians 12:7 and 13-1-3, mandates corporate benefit and unity, not personal emotional satisfaction. The pagan ecstatic worship parallel. A. Mystery cult worship practices. Mystery religions emphasized secret knowledge, ecstatic rites, and communion with a deity through altered states. House explains that such practices often included self-mutilation, frenzied dancing, and incomprehensible utterances, p. 136 to 137, 139. These experiences were often interpreted as spiritual superiority, an idea Paul directly opposes by teaching that true spirituality is evidenced by love, order, and understanding. 1 Cor 13:13, 14:1-19. B. Women and disorderly worship. Paul's correction of women speaking in tongues and prophesying, 1 Cor 14, verse 30-36, also finds a cultural parallel. In mystery cults, women played prominent vocal and emotional roles, especially in Dionysianism. The apostles' command was not patriarchal suppression, but a call to return to biblical order in worship, distinct from the chaotic and feminine-dominated rituals of paganism, p. 141. Paul's use of irony and apostolic authority. House rightly observes that Paul did not directly denounce tongues as illegitimate, but rather relegated it to the lowest place among the gifts, 1 Cor 12:28. His appeal to personal usage, I thank my God, I speak with tongues more than ye all, 1 Cor 14:18, is viewed as a rhetorical move to outclass the enthusiasts on their own terms, p. 143 to 144. The apostle concludes with authority. If any man think himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge that the things that I write unto you are the commandments of the Lord, 1 Cor 4:7, KJV. This declaration exposes the false as those unwilling to submit to apostolic truth, even if their experience seems spiritual. V. Legitimate tongues versus counterfeit manifestations. House affirms that there was likely a legitimate gift of tongues in Corinth, as Paul does not ban the practice outright, 1 Cor 14:439, but seeks to regulate it, p. 146. Key distinctions include true tongues were orderly, interpretable, and Christ-glorifying. False tongues imitated pagan ecstasy, lacked interpretation, and were self-serving. Paul's correctives emphasized intelligibility, self-control, and submission to apostolic doctrine. By these criteria, much of what passed for tongues in Corinth appears to have been counterfeit or misused, rooted in their mystery cult background. Conclusion. H. Wayne House provides a comprehensive and well-documented analysis that challenges the modern assumption that the tongues in 1 Corinthians 12-14 were heavenly languages. Historical parallels with Greco-Roman mystery religions, especially Dionysianism and Apollonian practices, shed light on why the Corinthian believers gravitated toward ecstatic speech. The Apostle Paul, while measured and strategic in tone, ultimately rebuked such practices and reoriented the church towards spiritual maturity, order, and edification. The tongues of Acts were intelligible languages used for evangelism. The tongues of Corinth, in contrast, had been co-opted by a carnal congregation steeped in paganism. Paul's aim was not to affirm emotionalism or spiritual elitism, but to bring every expression of the Spirit under the lordship of Christ, the authority of Scripture, and the edification of the church.